Hello and welcome back to the next webinar in our Designing Games for Professional Military Education series. Today I'm going to be talking to two friends from Germany who have, in the first in this webinar series, designed a PME war game off the back of an existing commercial war game, that being Seb Bae's Littoral Commander. And I'm really excited to have them on because this is a great example of how you don't necessarily need to do all the basic design groundwork first. You can absolutely take an existing system and build upon it. And if more people did that in the PME world, there'd be a lot less pain and a lot more high quality war games out there. And the picture has been on this starting slide deck since the beginning. So I'm very glad we finally managed to make the time to get everyone together between the various time zones. So, Frederick Thomas, guten Abend. Welcome.
Hi.
Thank you very much for agreeing to join me today. What I'd like to start with is just a quick introduction by yourselves, explaining how you got into wargaming and what you do professionally. And just to keep it simple, we'll go Frederick and then Thomas, please.
Yes, Ed, thank you very much for having us. I'm a major in the German Army. I was a company commander till last year, and I'm currently part of the General Staff Course of the Royal Netherlands Army. And I will, finalize this in the upcoming year, and then we'll see where this goes. With regards to wargaming, I have had my first real interaction with wargaming in 2020. I was at the Expeditionary Warfare School in Quantico, and I got my hands on Sebastian Bae's war game, which was then named Fleet Marine Force, and which is now known as Littoral Commander in the Pacific and Little Commander Baltics. And that was my first interaction with wargaming, and basically the inspiration to do multi-domain brigade operations.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having us on the show. I'm Thomas Altmann, currently Lieutenant Colonel, also in the German Army, serving as a battalion commander of a logistics unit. I got into wargaming probably in 2008 in another setting. I was a captain and using it as a matrix wargame. I didn't know that it was wargaming. And I really got into it in 2003, participating in a design course from the Naval Postgraduate School, and try to explore venues to use wargaming for professional military education, especially the two-party exercises, we would call it. And that was the starting point for me, having something like real fog of war and friction in a setting that could be usefully employed in an educational setting.
Okay, great. I like the difference there that one of you had a sort of longer term run up and then yourself so not having necessarily as much of a background, because I feel there is a perception that people who design war games have been wargaming since birth, and that is not the case. And do not be discouraged if you're coming late to the party. This is something that is for everyone. I just want to highlight there are other people who've helped bring this game to life. I'm not going to list the names because they're on the screen. I've said before in an episode that it takes a village to launch a war game. Whilst you two are the principal designers, and that's why I've got you on, not don't want to dismiss the contribution of the other people there. The first question I always ask in this series is what drove the requirement to design a war game, which really means what was lacking that you felt this game could solve. I don't know who wants to take that.
Yeah, I will just start and then I will hand it over to Thomas. So as I said, I got the glimpse of wargaming with Little Commander, and I was amazed by that game. And it was super easy for me to understand more of how the Marine Corps is changing. And so it was certain for me, I will take this wargame back to Germany. What I wanted to do with this, I had no idea at that time. And then I came back to Germany, did a couple of things, and then I became company commander. And at that time, I had a battalion commander who was very much focused on we are changing things. And the German army was in transition at that point. We shifted and created medium brigades, similar to the striker brigade combat teams, not equally, but it's very close. And what we realized at that point was we're changing the way we fight. And the question was, how do we teach this? And when we had this problem, I had a solution right away. I said, hey, I have an idea. I have seen and experienced firsthand how with wargaming, you can make people understand how we're going to fight this in the new way we're fighting. And so we used this game. Basically, I started on my kitchen table, creating small tokens and units, and tried to put down this medium brigade to teach from the company level to the brigade level to officers and NCOs, how are we going to fight the future fight? And we were missing this. And we did this in the battalion. We did this on a brigade level with the brigade commander and the battalion commanders playing themselves, which was very interesting to watch. It was a very, very strong emphasis on, okay, how are people making decisions at this point? And so, yeah, I think we were lacking to cover the ground from books and theories and ideas to doing something in the practical field of work. And we needed to have a bridge established to make this happen. And we did this through wargaming. And I think by using this as a method, it was easier for people to understand what is my role in this fight? How is the brigade going to fight in the future fight? How are we implementing multi-domain aspects or multi-domain operations? Everybody talks about it, but nobody really knows what it is and what it does. And so we wanted to make it more tangible. And that's what helped me. It was my first intro. It then got much bigger than this, but that was the first kickoff. And that's when Thomas stepped in. And I tried to explain to him, okay, what I'm trying to do. And then Thomas, with all his experience, said, okay, look, I think this is what we should do. And he stepped in, and that created a momentum that I didn't have at the beginning. As you said, we need a village to make a war game. And in the beginning, I was by myself. And when Thomas entered the sphere, everything got much more professionalized. The team expanded super quickly, and I think Thomas can point out a little bit more about this for him. But it was really extremely helpful to have his experience and his knowledge on that topic. And then this drove much faster, got much bigger than I ever anticipated it to be.
Yeah, Frederic, don't underestimate your contribution, because in the end, the basic design was there from the beginning, developed by Frederic. And I want to highlight two things that, from my perspective, were lacking in our PME setting. And that is competition and consequences that are typically delivered by a wargame. We have pretty good educational settings, but we, in comparison, have a lack of competition and experiencing consequences of decisions in a PME setting. And that was my ambition or my motivation to step into the wargaming sphere in the first place. And as Frederic pointed out, my requirements, there were none, because I searched for a project after I was participant in the analytic wargaming design course of the Naval Postgraduate, and I searched for a project to actually hone my skills and to test if I can really design a wargame. And then, by chance, we met each other. Frederic said what he was doing, and I was instantly engaged to say, hey, I would like to contribute in this team. And we got a lot of support from superiors, from the organization, especially in terms of all the design and the production capabilities and the process that is underlying getting to a product. That this was actually, if I say two words, it is chance and curiosity that drove me into this project.
That's fascinating. So I just want to sort of summarize that in simple infantry handfuls here is that the German army did a restructure that created effectively an educational gap or an awareness of how to fight because we're very good at restructuring forces and then not training or educating people how to make it work. You, Frederick, were in a brigade that was restructured and identified that as a gap. And then the organization didn't direct this to happen. There was no school that was like tasked with doing this war game. So you self-generated it and then you found each other or you knew each other. So again, the power of networks and the power of um, being able to bring people on because often the PME school sort of sits in its little silo and says we're going to do a war game on our own and doesn't reach out to all the war gamers that have been hiding in the force, you know, um, or have actually been invested in with formal training, like you, Thomas, who actually did a course in analytical war game design, which often is not tracked in the system. If you asked someone to find all the war game designers in the Canadian Army, for example, I think they would have no idea how to pull that information from the system. Does that track as a summary?
I think you're spot on, Ed. And just to emphasize on what you were saying, so the problem was that we were transitioning without having doctrine to cover this up. So we were still trying to figure out how are we going to fight in the future setting? How are we going to fit into the force structure that we have in the German military? And so we had a lot of thoughts. There was a lot of papers being written. We did a lot of exercises. And the question was, how do we try to push this to a bigger audience? And as you know, writing doctrine takes a lot of time, and we needed to something in between, something tangible, but that also could act fast and create pictures. Not only having words to read, but also something to actively do, which helps you to understand how this is working and to also experience what's happening if it's not working, if you're doing it wrong, and you go into a battle of attrition that you cannot win. I think this game has many aspects that you can learn from, and I think Thomas and I we did this in various settings, and I think there was not a single one that did not learn anything out of this war game. But yeah, you're absolutely spot on with your summary.
Okay, before I move us off this slide, I just want to do a bit of I just want to ask Thomas, is this a model exercise behind you in the picture that I pulled off your LinkedIn?
This was actually my training at the officer school, where I was trained as an advanced tactical trainer. This is something like the model of the scenario we used back then. So it is comparable to something like a rehearsal of concept
Yeah,
or
yeah.
code visualization. Uh, and there we did some training to improve our skills in terms of tactical training.
I just think it's great that we've managed to, whilst talking about a war game, we've also got another absolute sort of ancient tradition of building a massive model and getting everyone to visualize it and walk through it. And I don't see this enough, especially in the digital era where everyone wants to put something on a PowerPoint slide, and there's just something powerful about all being stood in the field and realizing the speed, distance, time, difficulties on the force that you've got. And obviously that is only expanding with all the persistent ISR and long range strike.
In this setting, it was, and that's always the ambition, to put the operational design into the terrain and understand the relation between forces, time, and space.
That's going to segue us nicely into the next question. So I'm moving the slides on. So this is a picture of the game because some of the viewers may not have actually seen Littoral Commander. So just as a quick overview, it's a hex-based grid system, and you have blocks which have combat values and properties on them, and that's what's shown in the center of the image here. And then to either side are a number of cards with cubes on, which are denoting values tracks such as ammunition, supply, and hit points, and so on and so forth. And that's a very very quick canter through. And there are also capability cards which cover off the effectively non-close combat aspects of the game. I'm just doing this as a quick overview, and so Frederick Thomas, don't feel like you can't go into more detail on that, but this could be quite overwhelming for someone who may not have seen it before. So that's a picture of the game set up on a number of tables. What were the aims with this particular war game that you were trying to achieve? You've talked about the high level requirements, but in terms of what goes into the game, what is a player supposed to experience through playing the game? Feel free either one of you to kick off.
Yeah, so I think mainly what we're trying to achieve is create a common picture of how we're going to set up a fight, but at the same time create dilemmas so that you have to make a decision on the spot. What the basic idea is that you are playing as a blue player on the level of a battalion commander, having companies, on the red side being a regimental commander having battalions to lead, so that we have this 3-to-1 force ratio enemy to friendlies. And we could see that regularly when we were playing with people, that if you are created with a situation where you don't know everything, you don't know where the enemy is, you don't have your high value targets or your high payoff targets that you want to shape away with your artillery, but you don't see them, and then people don't know what to do. And you want to bring them in a situation where they have to think and where they have to utilize commander's intent to the best of their abilities. And I think this is something that we wanted to achieve as well, to create a sphere where you have to be clear in your guidance. And the beauty of this is, that's the way, by the way, that Sebastian taught me in Quantico. When you're playing as battalion commander, you're the only one standing at the table. There's no one else. You cannot communicate to the other commanders and say, hey, what do you think we should do? No, it's you. You are making a decision. And you either have all the information you need to make a decision, or you don't. The question is, what do you do then? And I think that's very, very beautiful to see how people react with this level of knowing and not knowing, and still acting in a way that commander's intent is being executed in a proper way. And sometimes the commander's intent is just not good enough, that you don't know what the ultimate goal is. And sometimes it's just people are not really trusting themselves to take risks. And I think the beauty of wargaming is you can take risks, and then you'll see what happens. And nobody has to die. And I think this is important to get this understanding of my gut. What does my gut tell me? And my intuition combinate with, okay, what did I learn? What is the tools that I have learned in my entire professional life to cope with situations of uncertainty that we have? And I think this is one of the game designs that amazed me very much with Sebastian's game. And that's why we took it the same way. We have a commander on both sides, and then the subordinate commanders are the actual players. And I think that is the beauty of the game. And we've played this at the Command General Staff College in Hamburg in Germany. And even on that level, you could still see individuals who struggle to make decisions when they're not feeling that they are well informed. And I think that's something that you have to constantly work and train on to become better and to make decisions fast. And you cannot always rely on more information because it's a time-sensitive environment, and we have to make swift and decisive decisions.
Thomas, do you want to add on?
I think Frederic was spot on. Can just that's the point. Create a training environment where you force people to make decisions on a constant basis and live with the fog of war or the lack of information, and actually experience that you have an opponent that is taking his own decisions, and you don't train against the trainer, but you train against another opponent who has his own will and tries to win. And this is something that adds, from my perspective, value to the development of future leaders.
So I want to highlight two aspects on a game design perspective, because on the surface, when you look at the number of blocks, you might be thinking like, that's a lot of stuff for someone to move. But the way you designed it, which is almost the meta game, and again, I think sometimes game designers can just focus in on the core mechanics of what's going on the board rather than what the player roles are around the board, is that there's a higher level commander issuing orders to battalions and units, and then those unit commanders are moving pieces. So actually, the span of control in terms of what they need to cover on the board game is smaller than in a traditional hobby game where it's 1v1 and you would need to move all of these pieces, and your turn might take a long period of time. And we will get into a slide which shows the turn system. But another aspect is that if you do full I go, you go, where the entirety of blue moves and then the entirety of red moves, and you have a lot of pieces, it can be a lot of waiting around for that player just watching what the other side is doing. Whereas if you both have individual units activating in sequence and having a shared impulse system, so you go back and forth, one, it feels a bit more realistic about action counter reaction of warfare, and two, you don't have people waiting around for an hour for someone else to finish their turn. And the tendency is in a lot of PME games, people wander off and go and do something else and then come back and then don't know what's happening on the game system. So I think that's an important point to highlight. And Thomas mentioned consequences of decisions, and one of the things with this is that there are resources that are expended through the course of the game. The obvious resource is the military, is the ground units that are on the board that can be damaged and removed, and only having so many of them, and they can only cover so much ground and all the rest of it. The other is the resources those units expend, such as, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, later on the Littoral Commander model was effectively they have hit points which are reflecting their combat effectiveness, and they have ammunition which increases the number of combat die they roll. But they also, and those ammunition types are can go off for a number of areas. And then you also have the joint capability cards, or the other effectors, which you will need to decide when to play, and the obvious trade-off being that you play them at the wrong time too soon, or they could be countered, and so on and so forth. So a lot of constraints and consequences space. Does that track with what you were saying earlier, Thomas?
Actually, the core design of Littoral Commander with the formation sheets, and that you have ammunition, that is a core piece of just the resources that you have, was something that intrigued me in the first place to get into this game, because this is a really cool design done by Sebastian to integrate sustainment and the effect of decisions to a later, the options that I have on a later stage. Do I go with all in this round to achieve an effect, or do I keep a certain amount of ammunition or resources for something that occurs on a later stage? And I think that was something that is designed in Littoral Commander in a way that intrigued me as a logistician, because it integrates things into the tactical decision making that really got me into the system in the first place.
Maybe to emphasize on what Thomas was just saying, logistics. So I'm an infantryman myself, and logistics are only important for me if I don't have them. So I hear that a lot, that we don't credit logistics enough. And we have seen in multiple games that if you don't focus on logistics from the early stages of an operation, you will fail. And the same goes for fire support. So we had groups and they said, I don't need a high value target list or a high payoff target list. I know this, I know what to do. And then you realize that you can't shoot everything, because if you start shooting at everything you can see, you're running out of ammunition. And then you have to prioritize. Do I resupply my air defenses, or do I resupply my long range fires? Is my long range fire actually efficient in trying to do what I'm trying to do? Am I being on track here? And a lot of people have their, what the hell effect after they played the first game. And they're like, oh, I ran out of my air defense really quickly, realizing that I can't protect everything. Even though we have air defense now everywhere, we're talking about counter UAV and all that stuff. It's not going to be everywhere at the same time with the quantities that we want it to have. So that's not able to protect everybody. So we have to think hard and make decisions. Who do we protect? Who do we have to protect so that our own operation is going to be successful? And those trade-offs, I think, is something that you can extract from the gameplay and realize. And that's, of course, difficult if you're trying to design the game. So how do you design this? How much ammunition is enough? How much ammunition is too much to still create a realistic picture of what's happening on the battlefield? And that was hours of Thomas and me arguing about logistics, me not knowing what I'm talking about, and saying, you know what, I want effects and this and that, and Thomas calculating in the purest way of science of war that this is an unrealistic amount of ammunition. This cannot be done. This cannot be transported at once. And then we had to come together and say, okay, how do we limit the amount of spare resources to an amount that is still giving you enough options to actually shape a target, but not too much so that there is no action required because you can just shoot at everything. And I think we came together there, a little bit of a Jomini Clausewitzian symbiosis here to say, okay, well, what is the outcome that we have? And I think we're already pushing a little bit towards your next question, what were the trade-offs we were doing? We can go to this further into a bit, but just saying that it was very difficult for us to find the proper way. And the only way to figuring out what was good was testing it and testing it and testing it with different people, with different backgrounds. And then we came to a conclusion, okay, what is the ultimate goal that we're trying to achieve here? And I think in the end, we have a pretty good product that emphasizes on all those aspects, but also making sure that if you want everything, you want nothing. So you always have to focus, prioritize, and have a main effort. If you don't do this, you will not be successful, not in real life, and not in this war game.
Yeah, I'm taking the lesson there that every wargame design team must have a logistician on board because otherwise you end up creating either unreality or you might send a dangerous signal for the amount of munitions that one, the country can't produce, and two, the army can't move around with you. It's always something like 10x what the frontline echelons like myself and you, Frederic, think. We're just carrying 5.56 around. What's the problem? Okay, yeah, that does lead us into the next question on design dilemmas, choices, and trade-offs. So there's sort of two buckets to explore here, like what you kept from Littoral Commander, which we sort of have spoken about a bit already, and then what you changed or added. And I just want to start us off on the topic of the you obviously kept the hex grid, but you changed the scale of the hexes. So if someone could start us off on there, and then I think we can balloon out from that.
Yes, so I can start with this. It was one thing that I couldn't really get my head wrapped around right from the get-go because the 20-kilometer hex was simply too big for me to comprehend. And when I compared the unit sizes in this hex to the size of the terrain, seeing, okay, there's an infantry platoon by itself in a 20-kilometer hex. I would not like to be that platoon commander. And so what we were missing, even though I enjoyed the game very much, was the actual tactical proficiency when it comes to what unit size do we have in which terrain. And with the goal to creating a war game for a whole German brigade to fight in, we needed to scope it to an extent where it makes sense for a company to actually operate in. And maybe even have different companies working together in one area, which also is an implication. The smaller the hexes, the smaller the entire map. Otherwise, you'll have a map the size of a room, and this is not easy to play with. So that, again, was a trade-off we had to make. But it was certain that the 20-kilometer hex was too big for us to work in, saying that the lowest unit we have on the battlefield is a platoon. It needs to be a space where a platoon can operate in, but also where companies can operate in. And so we scoped it down and narrowed it down to an area where we could actually fight and have the terrain in our advantage to actually use, but not so small that you can't depict the whole battlefield. And so I think that was the trade-off that we had to do right from the beginning, how to scope it down so it will succeed in our needs, and that will help us to achieve the objective that we're trying to achieve. And Thomas was actually, he did all the math behind this. Again, I'm the infantry guy. I have a couple of ideas. And then Thomas said, yeah, you know what? I just calculated all those things. I run all the numbers, and this is what we should do. And yeah, I can tell you, that was very, very important to then keep track, because then you have to calculate all the way back. Okay, what's the range of our weapon systems in regard to those hexes? How many hexes is a realistic range for a certain weapon? And there's a lot of things. If you move and change one simple thing, the entire game is changed. And so that kept us awake at night. But to be honest, Thomas did a lot of those numbers because he had so much expertise in this area, and he translated this from other wargaming systems and said, okay, see, I think this is a realistic approach. And again, we tested a lot to then come up with the proper size of the map. Maybe Thomas can say a little bit more about the magic that happened behind closed doors in his office. But yeah, that's basically how we did this, because it was not workable for us to achieve what we tried to achieve.
So actually, it was magic, not behind closed doors in my office, but at home, because that was we did it as a sidekick job, not being something like tasked officially, but do it in a free time. And as we mentioned earlier, if you change the map, you change everything else. You change the units, you change distances, you change relations, you change time. And we approach it from a doctrinal perspective in terms of, can we achieve a training objective, and what is the model we have to employ to actually achieve these training objectives? And from this perspective, we changed the things in Littoral Commander to actually generate, after a turn or after a game, real lessons for the training audience. And therefore, it had to be somehow credible in terms of the terrain we use, the units we employ, the distances, the amount of ammunition, and the time we model into the game. And this was somehow all linked together. So we kept the core game system and nevertheless shaped all the things we needed to extract the training objectives after the game. Is this somehow understandable?
Yes. And I'm going to move us on to one slide. So this is what I like to do in this series, is to get to the heart of the game system, because the previous photo shows what it looks like, but the sort of the engine room of the game system is often the turn sequence and the turn and the phasing within that. And this also borrows from the Littoral Commander's system. So if anyone would like to sort of explain how this achieves the aims that you spoke about, and anything you changed or adapted.
Yeah, so we really like the sequence of events within the game. So what we kept and even made a little bit stricter is the planning phase. What does that mean? That means both sides are getting a written order. This can vary depending on what your learning objectives are. If you're doing this in a PME context, this can be a full written divisional order with all the annexes and with all the stuff. If you're working on a brigade level, as we've seen in our brigade, then this is more sophisticated. It can also be only a 5-paragraph order, really basic information to just keep the game moving. And that planning phase is where on the blue side, the brigade commander, and on the red side, the divisional commander, they give their order and they give their intent, their missions to subordinate units. And this is basically every turn, at the beginning of the turn, you have a short planning phase. And that's the only time where the commander can actually interact with his subordinate commanders. If they go separate and everybody's saying, I'm clear on what my task is, and I have no further questions, then, as I said, you go into the action phase and you're standing at the table and you're making decisions. And then there's no time to ask questions to your commander anymore. Then you have to wait to the end of the round. You're coming back together, and the commander can say, you did not understand my intent. You did not fulfill your tasks. And then he can influence his subordinate commanders. But you can't do this mid-game. And typically it takes a game to understand what is really important here. But then you realize if you fall back on the products you have used your entire career, you'll be easy on to be successful. If you just give clear tasks that you can actually achieve, and have an intent that is also working. If you don't see anything, if you don't have the full picture, then you'll be successful. And just to indicate in the action phase, what we're doing is we have one side in the initiative and the other side is basically responding. And then you have the blue side, 1st Battalion, having 3 actions. They conclude their actions. Then the red regiment will take the next 3 actions. And then it goes from blue to red until every battalion, every regiment has done its 3 actions. And at that point, the round ends and we go back to the planning phase where we're taking a look at, okay, did we achieve what we tried to achieve? And then we give new orders if it's necessary. And then we continue. And then it's always in interaction, blue, red, all the time. And typically we do this on the same map. Again, it depends on what your scope is, what you're trying to achieve. This can be also done with a white cell, that you only have a map with your own troops and only see enemy troops on the map that you actually did a recon on, that you spot. Depends on what you're trying to do. You can vary in this game. You can do this on one table, 2 sides playing with each other. You still have the fog of war, but you can also do this in a more professionalized level if that is your training objective. And so we're super flexible when it comes to what is it that we're trying to achieve. And basically on the bottom, which you can see is long range combat, interception. All this is basically taken from Littoral Commander because it was working. We only optimized it to our needs. And so the game system is very similar, if not the same, to Littoral Commander. But then we adapted it, changed it to our needs. And yeah, maybe Thomas wants to point out a little bit more on his perspective, because he had a major impact here as well, just because of his experience also with different war games. And that was very helpful to create a game system that makes sense to everybody, and that is easy to do as well, and not too complex compared to some war games that you can buy, but you need like 2 days to actually just understand the rule set. We try to keep it as simple as possible.
Yeah. In addition to Frederic, in the easiest sense, you can just grab the scenario book, take one scenario and play from, for example, 2-on-2, 3-on-3 without any written orders whatsoever. Everything is in the scenario. And if you want to achieve some training objectives, then you can add several layers to it. You can actually make as Frederic pointed out, the planning phase a little bit more in detail, or the deployment phase can vary it. You can add certain scenario cards and alter different aspects of the game. But in its core mechanic, we kept the turn sequence of Littoral Commander, and it is depicted as it is here, alternating impulses by players in the action phase, then the initiative check and the victory check, and then it goes to the next turn until one party achieved the objective that is stated within the scenario. And you can add layers to it in terms of just very certain phases within the game. What I found pretty interesting is the question of communication during the action phase. If you have, in a normal setting, 3 players playing the red side, 3 players playing the blue side, and they try to exchange information. But as they do it, they actually give the other party information in terms of what they try to achieve, what are their limitations. Actually, for example, these sustainment sheets, and then you come to a conclusion that players want to hide certain information from the opposing party on the table. And you can do it by design in terms of separating the parties, or you let experience them that during the game that they come to the conclusion by itself that they probably should do some huddle beside or separated to the other party, that fog of war remains in terms of information management.
Yes, and so the blocks do provide a limited fog of war mechanism. And what you spoke to there, Thomas, I've seen in several war games where the idea that players are getting information from other people in the room, which is not modeled in the game system, and it's often a case with emission control rules where everyone gets to set their emission control state, and they always set it really low, and then they all have massive conversations about what they're going to do as players, as human beings at the side of the table. And I was stood there thinking, well, you can't have that conversation on this MCON state, so we have to bump you up to something like 2 or 3 just to achieve that. And that's often an issue with the gaming the game versus playing the reality. But as this is a brigade level game, and therefore more focused on ground assault versus Littoral Commander, which is looking more at the future of the Marine Force with long range strike. I'm just interested if there is anything in the ground assault combat aspects that you changed that you would like to just highlight as an example of taking a small piece of the system and editing.
Frederic?
I can talk to this. Thomas, you want to tackle this, or should I just start with this?
We kept the basic design.
Yeah, it was very difficult though. So the question that we had is, how do we keep units from dying too quickly? And it was very difficult to do. We are not really happy that you could within 1 round spend the entire ammunition of your platoon or company, and then you're done with this. So we kept a limit on this so that you cannot utilize the entire ammunition that you have, and then basically have an infantry company with no ammunition left. That was not for us, not really realistic, and so we limited this. Gave them a little bit more ammunition too, and we couldn't really increase their survivability. And so what we did was we just made it harder, and we calculated very strongly on, okay, how do we actually create kills with the combat values of the different units. It was a lot of counting, a lot of math required to say, okay, if we have a Russian tank of different sorts, how much combat power, how much firepower does it have against a different unit? And there's always trade-offs you have to do. And I think that's one of the most difficult things, because the game is not designed to do ground combat. Talking about Littoral Commander. And then trying to get ground combat as part of the game was really difficult for us. I think we found a way now where you have, as a company, enough ammunition to last at least 3 days. without being resupplied, and not being able to just shoot out everything you have in one situation. But again, if you are careless in your close fight, you will have significant casualties. And this is something that I think is realistic. Doesn't necessarily mean that the unit is entirely destroyed, but it's not combat effective anymore, and therefore it's not part of the game anymore at this point, because they just sustain too many losses and they cannot conduct any more actions. And so I think for me, that was one of the most, or the biggest concerns that we had in Littoral Commander is the ground combat, because it's very much focused on long range fires. And then trying to combine this with each other, that was real difficult. And we struggled a lot to making this better. Yeah, Thomas?
Yeah, we had long discussions with regard to survivability and with regard to how many effects can we generate. And we came back to the conclusion that you can just fire a certain amount of rounds from one system. And then we also calculated in terms of a German core unit always has something like 14 main weapon systems. Then we compared it to a Russian battalion with something around 30 systems. Then we calculated the hit points in terms of the amount of systems. And then we said, okay, what does it mean in terms of how much can you actually fire with one unit? And our solution was then a dice limit to somehow limit the shootout effect when you said no limit. And the ground combat, the main limitation we designed is that we say we either have something like 4 to 6 dice in max that you can shoot. And this in terms of the then the way we design combat power, the effects of certain units, range, and effects that limits the effect naturally. This is somehow this was the trade-off we had to make actually in this game, creating a dice limit to make it to the next round.
And I'm really glad you've mentioned that, because I think it's an important point about adjusting an existing game, clearly designed to privilege long range strike and intercept versus the ground combat aspect, and therefore the focus switching and you needing to make some hard choices in that. It also speaks to the often tension between destruction and disruption, and the psychological and morale component of that. And long range strike tends to focus on destruction, and close combat often is more about disruption and forcing people to either withdraw or seek life elsewhere so you can continue the attack. And that's where maybe applying a common mechanics between phases can sometimes privilege one or the other. So I'm glad we've got that bit on the record. What I didn't ask earlier is, what time bound did you give to a turn? You obviously changed the hexes to 5K. Did you reduce the time scope for each turn?
So I can, if you want, I can show a slide to this. But what we said, basically, in the area of operation we're playing with the 5K hexes, we're talking about hours. And in the bigger scope, the 20-kilometer hexes, if you want to utilize them, for example, logistics, that you say we want to run logistics in the background, therefore we don't need to zoom in as much, we're talking about days. And so basically one game round would be approximately 4 hours of actual combat. And therefore the focus is on hours. I think Sebastian never intended to really put a tag on what is one round in the real world. But for us, it's hours. It doesn't actually matter if it's 2, 3, 4 hours. But we see a continuation of combat that is more timely compressed. that we can do more actions within the game. But the entire game, typically being up to 10 rounds, would approximately be 1 to 2 days of an operation. That is the scope that we are having. Are not getting too big and the time wise. But again, it's since it's a professional education tool, the time is not the crucial aspect here. And that's what we try to do with the round system. That we're saying that the round is important, and it's a little bit abstract. And I don't know if that makes sense at all, but the time per se was not the key point that we're trying to achieve and say, okay, we need to have a specific amount of time and then calculate a couple of things into this. But we said it has to be enough time so that resupply, for example, of artillery units can actually occur. And that doesn't happen within minutes, it takes hours. And therefore, that is what the time is so important in this game.
No, that makes sense. And there are often two ways of game designers approaching it: is work out exactly speed, distance, time, and then build everything off that. Work out that, which is more science, and then the art of like what are we trying to say can happen, and therefore what's a period of time, sort of left and right window, which it occurs. Because there is once you make everything so rigid, people can then start to nitpick often too much with how much can happen in a turn, rather than the idea that we've managed to achieve this much in the turn because that's what you would achieve in the phase of the battle. So that's good.
So with regards to units, space, and time, what we try to achieve, and this is basically also in Littoral Commander, the map that we are depicting with the different hexagons. This is basically a modified combined optical overlay. So what you're seeing, if you're taking a look at the map, you see different colors indicating go, slow go, and no-go areas. And then you calculate this with your movement that you have on your unit token. For example, a regular wheeled unit has 6 movement points. And what you do then is you have either go area or slow go area. You just calculate how many hexagons I can move. If you have a go area with 6 points, I could just go 6 hexagons, super easy. If I have a slow go area, which costs me double the points, I only can go 3. And so you can actually do this. You can calculate, if I move now, when will I be at this point? How long does it take me to go there if we go on direct through maybe rough terrain? If we using the road network that we can have to get there in a different way, but faster. And so you can actually calculate this. The map helps you doing this. Yeah, Sebastian never really emphasized on explaining that super much, but for me that is super so obvious. You have avenues of approach. The map talks to you. Basically, it says, I'm an avenue of approach, attack in this direction. And if you take a look at the map, you can tell, okay, this is an avenue of approach for the enemy. It is wide enough for a whole regiment to conduct an attack, or we only have very small and slim areas where the enemy can get through, but it will slow him down eventually. And so basically with this, you can add terrain modification, and you can always take into account how long does it take me to do this, and at the same time see the range of your weapon systems and say, if I move my artillery into this position, I can strike at this range. And that was important for us. And yeah, basically, if you make it easier, it's a Maku. And it helps you to navigate with the tools that you have within your planning purposes.
Okay, so I suppose moving us on to the components, maps, charts, so on and so forth. A lot of housekeeping going on the side, which can be seen as a burden, especially in a sort of commercial hobby sense. Any thoughts on that as a trade-off, on adding detail or making it simpler?
Yeah, look, I was a playtester for a Fleet Marine Force. When Sebastian only had one version, he made it on his kitchen table, and he came to the Marine Corps University and said, "Hey, look, I think I have a war game here for you, and I think it's good." And I basically, with everything that he had, stick to that original product. So the Littoral Commander in the Pacific, as much as I love it, is for the commercial market. And so we don't have those wooden chips anymore that you can just put on the table and they stand by themselves. You have those little flips that you put on the table. Everybody can see them. I'm not a big fan. I thought the original version, as you can see now here on the table, we have those wooden stacks on the map. And on the sides, basically what you have is your orbit. And that's each page is an orbit for, on the left side, a red regimental commander, on the blue side, a blue battalion commander. And what you're seeing is, you see your units, you see the cards that you use to attach special equipment to their units, and you keep track of your logistics. And so I think in Littoral Commander, you do this now with little tokens, and you have a lot of those little tokens to keep track on everything. For me, again, infantry guy, I'm not so good with small things. I'll tend to lose them. And so what we did is we do it as we do it in the infantry. We have a pen, we write things down, and that's how we keep track on numbers. And you can see with the color coding in the middle, you basically have your health points, and then the different units have different sorts of ammunition depending on their type. We have logistics, and all this is on this piece of paper. So basically, as a battalion commander, this piece of paper is everything you need to know about your actual current situation within your battalion or regiment. And you keep track on everything. And this is the soul of that game as a commander, to being able to have SA, to plan ahead, and to conduct logistics. And there was a lot of work getting into this, and also saying how much supplies should be put in there. And I think Thomas can emphasize a little bit more on this, how we got there. But the basic, what we took in there was the first iteration of Fleet Marine Force. And because I thought it was perfect, there was no need for me to change this. Because it was, those wooden blocks, I can grab them. It felt natural to me. And that's why we kept using it, knowing that it's getting heavier and it's more difficult to transport and to ship. But again, the purpose is here, simplicity. And for us, that was simple and it works. And that's why we used it.
Yeah. In addition, I've experienced Littoral Commander in the Pacific, and then I got introduced by Frederic into his first design of expeditionary brigade operations, what is now multi-domain brigade operations. And he always had these aggregated formation sheet, not for a single company, but for a battalion. And I found it super cool, because it reduced component complexity by a lot. And if you come to a PME setting where you have something like brigade or divisional sized units, and if you would stick to the Littoral Commander design, you probably would need 3 to 4 times the size of what you see now in terms of space to actually lay it out. And then you need the time to manage it and to track it. And the idea of Frederic to use it on one page, A4, in terms of size, use a pen to track and not the wooden blocks by Littoral Commander, that was something that we kept from Fleet Marine Force. And what you see now, also in terms of wooden blocks, in our first design, we had the Russian units designed in the same way as the Blue Forces. And the amount of units was 3 to 4 times the size, the amount of units on the map. It was unplayable for the red players. And there was the kickoff for us to say, okay, we desynchronize the echelons. So we have as a basic red unit, a koi-sized element on the blue side and a battalion-sized unit on the red side, to come to the amount of components that we see on the table right now, and component complexity was always something that we kept an eye on to keep it playable.
And that is blending us nicely into how do you avoid scope creep, which is often a issue with PME game design, especially once you've gone from the first draft, and then more people start to get interested in your game and then start to give their good ideas of what they want modeled. I think I've got a slide here. Sorry, the fidelity is not 100%, but what the thing that I'm interested in, which we haven't talked about in detail on scope creep, is the JCC cards, because you've called it multi-domain operations, and physically on the map is largely the ground and the close combat aspect, and everything else is attributed to the use of cards. So was there a temptation for scope creep in the multi-domain aspect? And I know I wasn't aware of this, but you called it something else, and then you called it multi-domain brigade. So I'd be interested to understand why that occurred.
Yes. So to start, I think what Thomas just described was the major breakthrough we had with regards to how do we organize units. As you know, Littoral Commander is basically a one-on-one. We have a blue battalion against a red battalion. And as we all know, that's not how we fight. We wish, but that's not the reality of how we fight. And we were really struggling. And I think Thomas came up with this idea and said, hey, listen, why don't we just, depict the battalion, a Russian battalion attacking and on one token to just make it easier and more, you can handle this many units easier if you don't go down to the company level. And it was not necessary to. And I think that was a game changer for us to just make it easier and don't have too many units on the same time at the same time on the map. Anyway, we said with scope creep, yeah. So I think this is one of the major criticism that we get with regards to the game is that people say, well, it is not realistic for a German brigade to utilize cyber attacks. It is not realistic for a German brigade to utilize this or that. And then we say, well, listen, you might be right, you might be wrong, I don't know, but you need at some point to understand what multi-domain can do for you. And if we as an organization are not able to exploit effects of multi-domain operations in the closed fight, then what purpose do they have? So why do we do all those super fancy deep strikes and cyber attacks and this and that if we can't exploit it on the ground? And I think we can see an example of this in the Ukraine war when there was the Starlink outage, which was a significant problem for the Russian commanders on the ground. And Ukraine exploited that situation, this weakness, by conducting their counterattacks and taking back land. And then basically, if we don't get an understanding of how multi-domain operations, on whatever level it will be conducted, have an impact on the close fight, then we have a serious problem. And funny enough, now in the Netherlands army created a CEMA battalions. So that's cyber and electromagnetic spectrum battalions, and they are located on the brigade level. And they don't plan for the brigade, but they say, hey, within your area of operations, we have the following options to exploit if you want to do this. Of course, that takes a lot of time in preparation. You can't just say, hey, I would like you to hack this outpost of the enemy regiment. That's not going to happen within 2 or 3 hours. But if they have anything prepared, you would be stupid as a maneuver unit on whatever echelon to not exploit this. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to bridge effects that might be even on the operational level, but combine them with the tactical level decision that you have to do to exploit the weakness of the enemy at that point. And we do this with tangible things. We have cards that make it harder for the enemy to utilize his long-range fire capabilities. It's harder for him to hit. So he has to make a decision. Do I still use my long-range fires to fire at you, even though I only hit very badly, and I have to use way more ammunition than would be reasonable just to have the slightest effect? I think there's a beautiful application of bringing multi-domain to the tactical level and give them an impression. What does that actually mean? What is the impact that you can exploit as a maneuver force with regards to the enemy? And that's where we're trying to get on top of each other. I think that's important to understand. And I think also, if we have those cards and people read and say, a tactical cyber attack? What is this? Or they read, what, a multi-domain task force? I have not ever heard of this. And so we're trying to implicate new technology as well, and just giving people awareness. Okay, that is a thing that is happening. And even if they just create slight advantages, they can still use this and they can still learn from it. And I think it's incredibly important nowadays to not only talk about multi-domain and have like this buzzword bingo of different things that you can achieve with this, but actually make it tangible. And that's what we're trying to achieve.
In addition to that, I think the biggest dilemma and trade-off, as well as in the Littoral Commander, is the design of the JCCs. The whole game is useless without the joint capability cards. Then it's just another block war game, and it just is not worthwhile playing it. On the other hand side, if you also have a look into the rule book of Littoral Commander Baltics, they consume a lot of space to just describe to the player how to play with them. And this is one of the things that is we haven't figured it out fully. And in addition, I also want to pick up one of the points that we received as a feedback is also who is able to integrate which effect into the fight. And I don't think that we have fully got to the point yet to say, okay, it is absolutely realistic. Nevertheless, that was one trade-off that we did. And maybe there's some refinement needed that also our superiors would say, okay, that is now a little bit more realistic in terms of design, that you say, okay, certain effects are, you either have them or you don't have them, and you can't choose them from turn to turn. And we did it with the scenario design to a certain extent, that we contribute, like in Littoral Commander, that you have something from the start, and maybe pending the PME setting, the facilitator has to say you can choose a certain amount of the capabilities to integrate them, or they are you are able to integrate them or not. And this is also something that intrigued me in terms of educational objectives, because you can alter the game as a facilitator by limiting the amount of JCCs, and you can set something like an objective in terms, okay, we want to focus on air defense today, we want to focus on cyber or other aspects, and just highlight them. And this is one of the you can't employ this game without the JCCs, but you have to be careful how you use them in the game, because they can be super complex to manage by the players. And I want to highlight, as we have this slide on, I didn't realize it, but we made one major change from the Littoral Commander design in terms of how we design capabilities. And you see red and orange boxes on the counters. And in the initial Littoral Commander version, everything that was joint fires could be intercepted. And we distinguished artillery and rocket artillery and said basic artillery can't be intercepted, and not to the extent that it is designed in Littoral Commander. There is something like an assumption within the Littoral Commander that every unit has a CRAM capability, and we deleted that and said everything that is red in terms of a capability is normal artillery which can't be intercepted. And everything that is rocket artillery, if you have a capability to intercept it, you can go for it. But that is a major change we did to the core design of Littoral Commander, because the balance is just that we have in this setting for a land domain fight much more artillery in relation to what is fired from a ship, in terms of can this be intercepted or not, and therefore we had to change this. This is one major change we did from the core design.
That's a good example of scope reduction in a way, which is go the other way as opposed to be scoped correct. Yeah, the educational aspect of the cards is great, and often again this refers back to the meta game aspect. And there is a value sometimes in just saying this is what you have from your hire. These are the assets assigned, and you can't deviate. And there is also a huge educational value of saying what are the ones you would want and why, and then it often highlights biases and heuristics. For example, the close combat warriors want to grab all the maneuver enhancement cards and not necessarily thinking about the systems of systems approach of what's the thing you need to disestablish the enemy system that might function differently to yours, which is normally a fires-based system. And then if you then introduce things like when you have to draft the card this turn for it to take effect in 3 turns time, then that's in that whole like where do I want to be in three moves ahead thing, which again so many military officers I think are very much living like in the present only rather than playing chess as the sort of thinking 2-3 moves ahead, which is really getting back to the core principle of why wargaming is so important, because it forces you to visualize ahead and seek opportunities and gaps that you can then widen. So I think I've got one more slide.
And I think I still owe you an answer, though, to the name of why we named it multi-domain brigade operations. I completely forgot. No worries. So in the beginning, it was expeditionary brigade operations. Why? Because we wanted to create an expeditionary brigade. The medium brigade compared to the striker brigade combat team, being able to do this. But then it got bigger. And then we created other brigades of the German military. Now we created the 2 brigades of the Netherlands military, the 13th Light Brigade and the 43rd Mechanized Brigade as well. And at some point, our team said, hey, listen, it's not expeditionary anymore. We're now talking about basically all brigades that we could possibly fathom, considering German brigades, Dutch brigades, other brigades as well. And the main core of this game is not only maneuver, but also multi-domain. And so there was a strong emphasis on we can change the name now to make sure that we're talking about the same thing here. And I was not super intrigued in the beginning because I said, well, we now did some marketing and the slower pace and people know the name. But then I think eventually we changed the name and it made sense for us because the scope got just bigger. And it's not talking about one brigade anymore, but we're now talking about the brigade in Lithuania, where the German military is part of. We're talking about German brigades in Germany and now the Royal Netherlands Army. And that's just creating a space that is so much bigger than just one brigade. And that's why we had to change the name. But I think we're going to stick to that one. And that one's going to be the final one because deep in my heart, I cannot have the name changed one more time. I'm just, again, an infantry guy. I have to keep this in mind. It's difficult enough for me. Jokes aside, but this is the reason why we changed the name and said, okay, the focus of this is multi-domain. And that's why we put it in the name as well.
Yeah, you've already printed the box, got the t-shirts and the merch done. So like, yeah, we can't change the name, so it's fixed. Yeah, that's a great point. And I know that Littoral Commander, as we've said, it was called something else, and then he had to change the name. So it's a sort of it's a good sign and a bad sign in a way. Like like that there's enough attention going on with your war game that someone wants the name to change. Um, and if that avoids friction from the organization and gets you more people, then because if you did a key search for MDO war games, your game's going to come up, whereas you might not be doing a key search for expeditionary. My next question is, how significant were cost and playing time in the final design? I think we've covered playing time um, in the general sense, but feel free to pile on that. And the reason I have this as a question is because you can have as great design as you want, but often the sponsor, and I appreciate you didn't have a sponsor at the start, but you might have inherited a sponsor as you got to the finish line, will say, there's only X much money for this, or I want it to go to every unit, and therefore there is this many units of production required, which can be quite expensive, especially with a physical board game production. If you're not going to assemble it yourself, which over a certain number becomes impractical. Or if it's a school, they might say, hey, we've got periods of instruction which are 1, 2, 3 hours. Therefore, your thing has to fit inside our periods of instruction. And I don't care what you have to delete to make that happen. So any of that come into your sort of calculus?
So I think in the beginning, we did not focus that much on money and cost. We did a lot of things by ourselves. And for example, I got money and funding from my battalion commander, which he had a special fund he could take money from for education purposes. And so we got money from this for the basic setup. But I think in the end, we relied heavily on things that you cannot put a price tag on. What I'm saying is we relied on the team that worked together. And if we were to pay each individual that contributed a significant amount of time into making this game better and spreading the word, we could not be able to pay this. So what I'm trying to say is the team effort and the voluntary time that is being put into this game is not something you can put a price tag on. And if you were, we would be broke because there's a lot of good people and they see the value of this and they say, hey, I think I can be part of this and make this better. And I think money can only get you that far. But what I think achieved is we made people see the options that we have with this war game, and they saw the potential too and said, hey, I want to be part of this, and this is the most important thing. Money is secondary for us because it's not the crucial aspect. It's not extremely expensive and we don't have to sell it. We give it to units. Sometimes we give the blank pieces to units and they can assemble it themselves the way they need it. Thomas can explain a little bit more. He has very good connections in Germany as well. And we relied heavily on some of the contacts Thomas had to actually make the game design more professionally, to create the maps in a more professional way. But basically, the core and the backbone of this is people who are willing to spend their spare time and to invest into this project. And if you don't have that, you'll have a big disadvantage. And I could see myself from just being me, then just me and Thomas working together to then have a team that does things that sometimes we're not even aware of because the team is getting bigger and bigger and people have their own initiative and they act things and before the AI part of it. That we have an AI computer that is facilitating games with you, that helps you. You can see it. Carl, he's a German uniform, and he's our AI tool that you can use to play the game. And there's a lot of things getting together on this because people invested time and effort into this. And I think that was the most important thing when it comes to time and effort, was people willing to invest not only money, but also their spare time and their thoughts and their creativity. And the same thing you can see to the left of this is ACOP with an augmented reality that you can play the game in an augmented reality setup. So a lot of people, a lot of thought, a lot of expertise going into this team to make the product and the learning experience better for everyone involved.
In addition to Frederic's points, I got into this project also to experience, are we able to design? And do we have the capability actually to design? And there's a great sense of gratitude to all the guys that contributed, that are actually on the first page. The contributors, either is it Sebastian Bae, who helped us over the whole period of time and supported us. Then Matt Kramer, who provided all the map work without charging us anything to several iterations. Then Thomas Hömske, who is a great graphical designer in the Bundeswehr Logistics School, who made all the design work and all the prints for us. And then Robert, who was my successor, who contributed and who provided the link to our IT guys here, Matthias, Tadele, and Malik, who then did the augmented reality and virtual reality and the AI work. This was something that we could not have designed from the start. This was a development that fueled itself during the process. And that's why we cannot, as Frederic pointed out, we cannot put a price tag on that because we have not kept track of our working hours, and we actually got a lot of support that was uncharged in terms of money and time by different either institutions, great guys that contributed to this overall project.
I think that's a great lesson. I just want to emphasize for the viewers, because so many times I hear military organizations say we can't do this internally. We have no skills. We need to pay a contractor a large amount of money to deliver one box, which will then live on the shelf in the institutional organization and never be played by anybody. Which and I have, if I had a pound for every time I've heard that, I'd be a very rich man. And your team has demonstrated that this is a passion project that people will get behind to showcase their skills, grow, develop, and learn, and also because they see the value of it into the organization in a period when we're not at war and we want to get better in case that eventuality comes to it. It's a bit like Google saying you can have 20% of your time to work on your passion projects. If only the military did that, we'd have a lot more good stuff going on. So I'm very pleased that you spent so much time just talking about the individual people's contribution stuff. And I would be guilty, certainly, of not necessarily thinking about these add-ons when I would be focusing on this play space. But this is a great example of like a force multiplier that also speaks to the younger generation who can sometimes be turned off by the sort of analog nature of the game at first glance, and the use of an AI rules assistant. Again, another example of like a great add-on that once you've got the core mechanics and the rules worked out, can really lower the barrier to entry and support people. Because the other thing that happens with this is you go, here's a game system, and everyone says, I don't know how to play it. I need a facilitator. I need someone to come with the game system to run it. And therefore the game is run less frequently and less often. And the understanding is not there. And people are just listening to the facilitator play the game rather than actually understanding and gaining educational value. Okay, if there's nothing else on that point, we're going to go to the playtest picture, which I've managed to find a picture of the Sebastian Bae playing this at a conference somewhere. which I think is great, closes the loop on the fact that the OG, the GOAT, playing the game that that's a spin-off from his one, which I think is great. And as I say, I don't think most wargame designers that I've met would not feel any negative emotion if someone was like, I've taken your game system and I'm building on it. That is a, if someone did that for any game I designed, I'd be very happy, pleased that my game was helping somebody else. It's not like in a commercial sense where someone's like, whoa, you can't change my game's perfect, and like, how dare you? You didn't ask my permission and all that sort of stuff. I think we are much of a more friendly and generous community than some people um, might fear some kind of retribution for that. So I'm really glad that this photo happened because for me it really sums up the positive win-win attitude of many wargamers. But I want to ask the reception that you've had with the game in the military circles, and if you could go from a sort of like junior officer, field grade, and senior level, because the receptions are not always the same thing.
Yeah, so first, I think you're spot on. I think the support from Sebastian was crucial, especially in the beginning. When I shared with him, listen, I want to take Littoral Commander and adapt it for the German military. I was not certain how his reaction would be, but he was completely understanding and positive, and he tried really to be a good mentor here, and gave me some tips and hints and said, hey, you have to look into this and be careful with this. It was great. And it was a great working with him. And I think for him, I can't speak for him, but I think it's great for him to see as well what has gotten out of it and what is the result that we can see now. And I think that's actually how it works. And if you, as a war game designer, see something and say, hey, this is exactly what I need, use it. Because we're doing this not just to do it for fun. We want to achieve something. And if we achieve this common goal together, then if you copy me, this is the best way of saying that I appreciate your work in regards to professional military education. When it comes to reception, yeah, I think, so I played this a lot with junior officers and for 2 times now with general staff officers in training. And I think overall the reception is very positive. There's always nuances where people say, well, I feel like this should be a little stronger or a little bit changed in a way that reflects my branch of military a little bit more. But I think overall we had a very positive feedback so far, and people are hyped to see this in action and experience it. However, we have some slightly older individuals who sometimes struggle. And it's not about the game itself, but again, that multi-domain aspect of the game. And is that actually realistic? And we have a lot of side discussions about this. And sometimes, people just don't want to utilize those effects and say, well, that's not realistic. We can't do this. A brigade fights by itself, maybe with divisional fires, but that's it. And that's hard to change when it comes to mindset. But I think overall, people are hyped. Of course, like any war game, the first game round you play is very much trial and error, and you just having your enthusiasm to do something. But after the first game, a lot of people go into this very analytically and say, okay, we have to prepare for this, we have to plan, and then we can execute this in the proper way. And it's not only about gaming and saying, okay, I want to be victorious, but there's a lot of actual understanding going on while playing this game. And I really enjoy seeing people playing it for the first time and the second time and the third time, because you can actually see the evolution of how they wrap their head around what they're doing. So I think the reception is pretty much positive, but maybe Thomas has different experiences with this.
Yeah, I totally agree with Frederic. Nevertheless, there's also a certain truth that a lot of experience of a training audience has to do with the experience of the facilitator. And in terms of that, with every iteration, I learn something in addition, how to do it better the next time. And to actually achieve training objectives with the group that you actually war game with in a PME setting. And that's a learning experience as well. And what you have to accept, especially if you want to train with war games, you don't know what you actually have to say after the first round, because you don't know what is the result of the first round, and you have to be flexible to actually then work with the training audience, and that you can't predict what are the consequences and the results of the game in terms of specific training objectives you want to tackle. Maybe you come to a completely other point, and that is something hard to grasp on in a PME setting where you have a tight schedule, where you have clearly designed training objectives, and this kind of flexibility of an organization has to be there to actually employ wargaming as a method for achieving training objectives in PME. This is one of the general observations I've made. And the wargaming is time consuming. And this is one of the major trade-offs in tight schedules, especially on schools and leadership education, that you actually have to compromise what you leave out to make time and space for wargaming. And I just want to highlight one thing here. Sebastian's role in all of this. There are a certain, and this is a limited amount of people that do a lot of stuff for the whole community. And Sebastian is one of these great guys that helps everybody to get better in this. And his role in the whole community worldwide can't be, I have no words for this. I'm absolutely grateful the way he helped us, the way he contributed to our success. This is just stunning. And this also creates an environment and a network where we actually now help also others. They ask us. And this is something that is really great in this community. The way we network, the way we help each other, the way we share our experience. And make everybody better in it.
Yeah, I love that. Pay it forward. That's the sort of wargamer motto. And if we all help somebody else with their game design, then the burden and the onus goes away. So that's beautiful words on that. I just want to emphasize 2 points that you said on that is that a lot of war game rules, or the way we often write rules in war games, follows from a bit of the hobby space where there's no facilitator. I've actually started thinking about writing, in addition to the rules, is a facilitator guide after a series of playtesting, which is not so much to say what are the lessons you draw out, but like how to keep players engaged, how to deal with like difficult questions, what are the common mistakes people make, misunderstanding rule A, B, or C, so on and so forth, as a useful aid, because the rule set itself is just, how it should be played, not necessarily how you get the humans to have the best experience. And I can't believe I'm sort of saying this in 2026, but uh, with all the news about how cash-strapped Western militaries are, the thing we seem to actually lack the most is time and attention. It's famously said we live in an attention economy. This is always a struggle when you're trying to fit complex subjects like multi-domain, which I've yet to find a senior officer who can actually describe multi-domain to me in a way that doesn't use 1,000 buzzwords. And then the answer is it's got to run in an hour, and you're like, yeah, cool. So therefore, you've got cards with multi-domain effects, and then someone goes, I don't like how that's modeled. Like, well, yes, yeah, but we have an hour to do that. Um, What advice would you give to other PME institutions, following off you said about people coming to you and you're obviously giving advice. So what's some of the advice you've given out to other organizations trying to start their journey on this?
Shall I start, Frederic?
Yeah, go for it.
Take the Fight Club international matrix and just assess yourself honestly. And then be clear if you want to invest the resources needed to institutionalize it. Too often I think organizations say it is a cool thing, it is now hyped within military organizations, but not everybody is aware of what is actually needed to institutionalize this as a capability. And therefore, I think the matrix Fight Club International made to assess wargaming capabilities of organizations is useful to actually have a look into it.
Just so I'm clear, that's the one I put on LinkedIn with the okay. I will probably add a slide onto this in the editing so people can see what that looks like. Yeah.
I would say one experience I made is that some institutions don't really know what they want, and they're not super clear about the desired effects they want to achieve. And at the same time, see, we utilized a war game that was already existing and modified it slightly to be used in the way we needed it to use. And what I see a lot of time happening, if people are using war games at all, they want to create something new. And the time and effort required to get the foundation to have like a product that is actually useful and bringing you the effects that you desire are completely out of line when you're taking a look at, is there not something you can use, which is not maybe 100%, but maybe 90% or 80% solution that you can adapt? Because I think just creating new war games all the time, but nobody's actually using them, that's not useful. This is not helping the problem. We need to have fewer war games that we actually utilize on a regular basis, because that's what wargaming is about. I mean, I think the process of creating a war game can be incredibly educational as well. I think Thomas and I, we had a lot of situations where we actually learned a lot of things while designing it. But I think the core effect that we're trying to achieve here is that people play this and people learn and they get better. Not only better in wargaming, but they get better in understanding of our organization and effects and how we're going to fight the future fight. And I think sometimes we're losing the focus on this. And we want super fancy products. See, for example, when I was at the beginning of Expedition Brigade operations, I was supporting a seminar in the General Staff course in Hamburg. And the German Army Development Organization was there too. And I had the chance to brief the two-star general about this game. And it was the early stages of my alpha, beta version of that game. And he said, well, I was expecting something more shiny. It looks kind of not professional. And I was like, yeah, that's the whole point. Give me money, give me funding, and I'll make this great. But you have to look through things that might be not super shiny or super pretty and see the value in the dynamic that you create. And if he were to do this, then he would have had a product relatively soon. But he thought, okay, it's not super fancy. It's like, yeah, I made it on my kitchen table. How is it supposed to be fancy? I'm an infantry captain at that time. So how am I supposed to make it fancy? I'm not Hasbro. I'm just a guy sitting on the kitchen table and creating those little blocks to create units by himself. And of course, now our products look much more better. It looks the way we designed it is much more in a professional way. It looks nicer, but this is not important. The looks of it. Can we use it? Does it work? Does it achieve the goal that we're trying to achieve? And I think that's a problem. And also, and I think everybody who does wargaming has this, that you come to a lot of institutions and they say, "Oh yeah, wargaming. I know exactly what you're talking about." No, you're not. So everybody uses the word wargaming and thinks, "Okay, that's call to action wargaming." I think, no, it's not. This is professional military education. This is foundational. I don't want to put like an plan of anything in this game and say, okay, we want to see if that core is working or not. That's not what this is about. This is about fundamentals, basics. And so for an institution, I would say do your homework, figure out what it is that you actually want and need, and then reach out to people who have the expertise and can make this happen. And don't start from scratch all the time. I think it's very frustrating. And that's exactly what we had in the beginning. If everybody does something completely new for no reason, I don't know. I think we have a lot of war games that nobody is playing. And does that make our organizations better? I doubt it. And that's why I would emphasize we have to talk about the same things. And yeah, PME wargaming is not the same as calls of action wargaming or any other sort of wargaming. You have to differentiate, and at the same time use what is there already. It saves a lot of time, effort, and money, and you can achieve the same results. That would be my 2 cents.
That's great advice. And this is exactly why I do this series because it's not just the game system, the middle. It is about like why you started and looking back, what advice you would pass to others. I'm continually amazed by how many senior officers continue to follow the trope of following the shiny thing, even though you would hope by this point they've realized that that's not necessarily the case. It also speaks to the importance of for game designers just getting a what I would quote a shitty first draft, just get it out and get prototyping and playtesting, and that there's also a danger on the reverse side of this coin that a consulting firm, I'm not going to name any names, just produces a really glossy and shiny game that they then convince the senior officer is good without actually having the mechanics and the components and the system that are needed to teach the lessons that you've devised. And that then gets installed from above. And people then, because it's the military, get told, you will play this. And that can do a lot of damage to the perception of wargaming and the willingness to partake in any wargaming because they've had this thing foisted upon them that a consulting firm did good lobbying to a 1 or 2 star. So, I mean, that's just my personal perception on it.
I have one trade-off to this. Component quality was an issue as a selling point. So that's why we started to use blocks, then to professionalize the design, etc. But in the end, the more effort you put into it, the harder you are willing to change certain aspects of the game because you already invested so much into it in terms of process, in terms of resources and time. And this is a trade-off that you have to be aware of, that when you look for quality too soon, you maybe make a mistake. On the other hand side, a fancy product sells better. That's always also a truth. And I think in this is Robert introducing Sebastian into our design. Robert told me as Sebastian saw the final product, he said, yeah, that's typical German. You nailed it 100% in terms of design and quality. I don't know if that's actually good or not.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Ursprung the technique. You guys are very analytically minded. I think some of us further west are a bit more loosey-goosey and just kind of like bluffing it. And I was gonna sort of my last tangential question on this was like that Germany has a bit of a Euro board games industry. The UK has next to no board games industry. And obviously cheapest way to get anything made is go to China, but there's reasons you might not want to do that for a PME game. So did you consider getting it commercially produced inside, or at least getting the components commercially produced, then assembled, and then distributed militarily, because of the board game industry in Germany, or was that not a factor?
We had an initial contact for this, and at this moment in time, it depends on feedback, because what the amount of time we have to put into to make one set is quite a factor. It's not about the components, but it is actually the time to produce a new set, and it depends on feedback. And if we get the feedback that there's much more sets needed within the military education domain, then we actually have to look for a producer in Germany to get this produced. At this moment in time, I'm finishing 10 additional sets, and it's quite time consuming.
Oh, God bless you, sir. That's real dedication. I once did this for Take That Hill as a demonstration point when they said it can be print and play. My first point was that most units have a black and white printer. My second was that I calculated how long it would take for a junior officer or junior NCO to print and assemble. And then I went to their salary and I worked out how much time that had cost the organization. And then I compared it to the price of one unit made at an economical scale of many thousands of units and then given out to them. And I was like, that's the point trying to get across when you say, well, just get someone to do it, and that's notwithstanding the issues of actually assembling it correct, and giving and you taking ownership of it. Because I've seen several war games printed, played, and then right arm swept into the bin at the end of the session because they just did it on shitty materials and they didn't care about it. So therefore, it wasn't available for reuse. But I think you've covered all of that. Very good. Any parting comments before we shut down?
No, just only one thing. So I think what we did, so we didn't do it commercially. We did it ourselves, but we needed hard materials. And I think what we did, we bought at one time, I think the entire stock of all red and blue wooden cubicles that were available in Germany. It was 1,800 red pieces and 2,000 blue pieces. I felt a little guilty after this, but this is part of the process, right? And I think yes, you could do this in a professional way. And what we did now is we created everything for a unit to create it themselves. We give the cubicles, the printouts that you can print them however you want to have this. But you can also design your own units. And actually, till 2 o'clock this morning, I was still putting together the Royal Netherlands Army because I want to play test it in the upcoming week with my Dutch colleagues. And so it's a process. It's a long during process, but I think in the end it's worth it. And yes, you could always get it in a professional way. But I think the beauty of this is to just invest time yourself and make this. It has something, meditating. I feel not 10 times, but if you create something yourself, it obviously gives you a good feeling. And I think from the raw material aspect, that's relatively easy. Maps is always a challenge. That I think is the biggest challenge we had to produce maps on good quality material that are durable and cost effective. I think that was one of the biggest challenges we had. But with regards to all the rest, I mean, you can do it in any way you want. I think that's the beauty of it is you're super flexible to make this game look the way you want it to be and utilizing it for the best of your needs.
Okay, and last one to close out. If people wanted to get in touch to get access to the materials, noting they would need to be probably a professional military organization, not private individuals, what's the best way? Like, are you comfortable with that, and what's the best way to do that, if so?
Yeah, so I think I can only speak about myself. Just reach out on LinkedIn. I'm there with my regular name. Maybe you can put it in the show notes as well. just reach out and we can just get in contact. I can try to help as good as I can. So yeah, no worries at all. Always glad to help fellow wargamers out and help institutions to actually conduct war games in the proper way, and to avoid the mistakes we just covered in this episode.
Same for me.
Okay, guys, thank you so much for coming on at a weekend, no less. Re-emphasizing the passion that you both have for this project and wargaming in general.